I never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion.
Am I audible to everyone? Please reply in the Winter Programming Bootcamp Telegram group. Okay. Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone. So is the screen visible to you? Okay, so let us begin. So let us begin with a quick introduction. So a lot of you, if you are from GEU, might know me already. But for those of you who are from GEHU, might not recognize me. So I am Meenakshi Mendola, and I am an assistant professor at GEU in the computer science department. And if you talk about my qualifications, I am an MTech CSE from IIIT Delhi, and I have also been an alumni to Graphic Era University. And I have worked as a full stack developer in the industry as well. So, yes, that was about me. So, we are going to be, as you all might already know, that we are going to be starting with the Winter Programming Bootcamp from today onwards. And it is going to be a 2-week programming bootcamp. And we are going to learn a lot of new things. Some things might be new, the others might not be, but anyway, this is going to help you a lot in your placements as well as for any selection process, be it on campus or off campus, whichever selection process you're going to sit for. Not only that, it will be a lifelong learning experience for you, since you're going to learn a lot of things which are going to stay with you throughout your lifetime. Right. So let us continue by talking about certain things like uh, how are we going to move ahead with this bootcamp. So you might already know about the schedule. So we are going to have classes uh, from Monday to Saturday, and the class will be for 2 hours. The session is going to be for 2 hours each day from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay, we are going to try to stick to this particular time every day. And so starting with the first classes, they are going to be a bit of theoretical part, but as we move ahead, we are going to code a lot, and you're also going to be given certain assignments along with certain practice tests that you can attempt, and it is most probably going to be the Hacker Earth platform. Along with that, on every Saturday, so we are going to have 2 Saturdays in this bootcamp. We are going to discuss a project, and this project will be something that you can, do during this winter programming bootcamp time. and along with that you can add it to your resume, so it will be a very good addition to your resume as well as to your skills, right? So yes, so if you have any questions up till now, you can ask your queries in the bootcamp telegram group. Also, we are going to refer to the same telegram group whenever we are in the live classes, so that you can ask any queries and I'm going to reply to that right away. You already have the schedule to what is going to be taught uh, at which day in the boot camp. So you can refer to that PDF. So is it a go ahead now, or do you have any queries? Okay, so one of you is asking which language will we stick to, C or C++? So since this is going to be a general programming bootcamp, we are going to start with C programming language, but we will also look into some certain projects that can be done using C++ programming language. So whatever I'm going to teach you will involve basic things that can be performed in both C and C++. So yes, the programming language won't be much of a problem. Okay, so Naman is asking about the prerequisites. So as of now, since we are going to start from the very basic, there are no prerequisites for you. That you might already know something or the other, since you're already going to be now in the fourth semester. You might already know some certain basic things of C programming or C++ programming. So only that particular part is required. Rest of the things we are going to talk about here. We are going to start with the very basic and then move ahead. Okay, Tanya is asking, will we get questions after every lecture? So you might not get questions, theoretical questions, but we are going to be giving you certain Hacker Earth tests, which is going to involve coding questions. And you can, so it is going to be every day, except for, let us say, 2 of those days where we are going to discuss some of the theoretical stuff. But other days, you're going to get tests which you can attempt. Yes, so the schedule, the complete schedule has been provided in the PDF or the notice that you might have already gotten, with which you actually registered. So yes, if there are no further questions, let us just begin. So so today is going to be the first class, and when we move ahead with the first class, let me tell you what are the things that we are going to be discussing. So in today's class, we are going to be talking about one of those things which are very basic for any computer science or information technology student, and these there are certain of these things that every one of you must know, right? And also, I would like to tell you that towards the end of the section, this session, I'm going to ask you about the feedback of the speed. So I'm going to move with a certain speed today. If it does not match you, you can tell that to me towards the end of the session. Okay? Okay, yes. So let us begin. We are going to talk starting with the very basic. So let us first, the first topic for this class is going to be memory hierarchy. You might have already looked into memory hierarchy a lot of times in, let us say, first semester, second semester, but let us just go through it again and review it. Okay, so as you all already know that we require data, right? For any kind of computation, since in using a particular programming language, we perform computations, right? We make computations easier for us. So for performing any kind of computation, we will require data, right? We will require some data on which we can perform some manipulations and some computation in order to get some certain result that we want. Okay, so for that, for storing the data that we have, we are going to require memory, right? You will require to store a particular data at a certain position, and for that we have our memory hierarchy. So memory hierarchy will not only tell you about how you are going to store, how and where you're going to store the data, but it would also going to compare for you about which kind of memory can you use at which particular time and for what kind of data, right? So if we say that our memory hierarchy is divided into two categories. So you all might already know it. We have primary memory and secondary memory. So you have primary memory and you have secondary memory. Right? Primary memory is also, let us say, known as internal memory, and this is known as external memory. Right. So what is primary memory and what is secondary memory? Can any one of you tell me? You can reply with your answers in the same group. Okay, RAM. What is RAM? Okay, so Mayank is saying primary memory is directly accessible by the processor or the CPU, and secondary memory is not directly accessible. That's correct. So, yes, yes, so a lot of you are giving correct answers. Let us just move ahead with these definitions. So, we say that in a internal or a primary memory, the data is directly accessible by the processor, let us say. So let us call that as a processor since it is going to process the data. So whenever you are requiring to pick up certain data, if it is directly accessible, that kind of memory will be known as primary memory. And if it is not directly accessible, it is known as secondary memory. So if the data is not directly accessible from the secondary memory, then how is it going to be accessed? So we say that it is going to be accessed using an input output module. Okay, so we say that accessibility will be using an input output module, right? So this is a very basic example here. Uh, and the difference with which you can understand the difference between a primary or an internal memory and a external or a secondary memory. So we say that primary memory is directly accessible by the processor and secondary memory can be accessed using an input output module. So now it is clearly understandable to you as well that if you have something which is directly accessible to you, then it is going to require less time in terms of picking up the data, right? And when something is not directly accessible and it requires something else, in this case an input output module to be accessed, then it is going to take more time, right? So if we consider a real life example over here, we say, if say for example you have a pen which is lying beside you and you can directly extend your hand and pick that pen up, that means it is directly accessible to you, right? And it is going to take less time. But consider something, let us say some up again a pen which is lying in some other room in your house, and you ask your brother or sister to get it for you, then it is going to take more time. Why? Because you are first going to tell some other person to pick that up for you and get that for you, right? So in this case, the pen is not directly accessible to you, right? So you say that it is going to require more time. Okay, so this is another difference in between the primary memory and the secondary memory. Now, whenever we are going to judge the memory by its performance, let us say in terms of how fast it accesses the data, or in terms of capacity, you say we are going to have a memory hierarchy. So let us also look at what all things we are going to have in the memory hierarchy. So we first start with registers. Okay, registers are come under the primary memory or the internal memory category. And then the next thing we have is cache. Okay, the next thing we have is random access memory or main memory, we can call that. So we say main memory, where you are going to have your RAM. And then you say, let us say hard drives. Then you have, let us say, optical discs or magnetic tapes. Okay. Okay. So this is how your memory hierarchy looks like. So let us just okay. Now, there is a pattern that this hierarchy follows. There are certain things which are very obvious, which you can note here. So the first thing is when we talk about in terms of the access time by which we have divided uh, these memories into categories is based on the accessibility, right? So since certain things are directly accessible, certain kind of memories are directly accessible, which means that they are going to be accessed very fast as compared to the other type of memory. So we see that as we move upwards in this hierarchy, the access time decreases, or we call that the access of data is going to be faster. It is going to require less time. So we say that access time decreases as we go up. That is fast access. And now, so as you already know, registers are of a very small size as compared to, let us say, hard drives or optical discs. So as the size of this any particular memory increases, the access time will automatically increase, right? And why will it be? So say for example, you are searching for a certain thing in your house, and in let us say your cupboards, and you if you're searching for a certain cloth, let us say a t-shirt, in your cupboard, so the size the bigger the size of the cupboard, it is going to require you more time, right? Because you will then have to look into certain different positions since the size is bigger and there are a lot of. Okay, so similarly we say here that as you go down the hierarchy, the capacity or the size increases. Okay, so these are certain parameters based on which you are going to judge a particular type of memory, and you can then go about considering which kind of memory do you require. Okay, and when you also talk about this, if you're going to talk about, let us say, the cost of these, the cost is going to increase depending upon the access time. So if the access time is less, they are going to be more costly. So the cost per bit, you call it cost per bit, increases, and you say that the access time decreases. Okay, so these are in terms of the different parameters that you can consider while you are talking about the different types of memory. Okay, so we have here discussed about what are the two different categories in which you divide the memory hierarchy, and also we have here discussed what are the different types of memories and how they are arranged in the memory hierarchy based on the access time, along with the capacity or the size, and as well as the cost. Okay, so if you have any doubts, now you can post it in the group. And we are talking about considering this particular section where we discussed memory hierarchy. Okay, so Tanmay is asking, what about SSD? So SSDs basically stand for solid state drives, since they are also going to be external, which is they will come under this section. So they are a bit faster, not a bit, kind of more faster than hard drive. So they are going to come above these. In this section, they are going to come above these. But whenever we talk about the cost, currently the cost of SSDs are expensive as compared to that of the hard drives, right? Yes, correct. Yes. Okay, so some of you are asking where are stack and heap located, in which memory. We are going to come to that. But for now, if you have any questions regarding this, you can still talk about it. Okay, so please repeat about the cost. So we say that as the access time increases, since the access time is going to increase, and as you go downwards, the cost of this any kind of memory as you go down the hierarchy is going to decrease. Okay, so, certain of you, some of you are asking questions like what is cache L1, L2, L3 memory. So this much detail is not something that we are going to cover in this boot camp, since it is going to require a lot of time. It is too much detail to be considered currently. So if you're still interested in this particular part, you can go ahead and read about it online. Okay, so just give me a moment. Let me just go through all of the questions. Okay, so Narendra Singh is asking, when we create any program in C or C++, in which memory is it created? Yes, good question. Let us we the next thing that we are going to talk about now is going to be that only. So just wait for a few minutes and we are going to be discussing about all of those things now. Okay. Any other question? Okay, so if there are no other questions regarding the memory hierarchy currently, then let us just move ahead. Let us now talk about the question that Narendra has just asked, which is where are we going to create any C or C++ program? If we create a C or C++ program, where is it going to be stored? Okay, let us move to the next topic now. So uh, so whenever, let us say, whenever you create a particular uh, program, it is, since you, so how do you start with this? Let me just go through it. Okay, Okay, so now let us say, for example, you are using Dev C++, let us say as a software in order to create your program, any C or C++ program, and you create it, you write down the code on Dev C++, and now you have saved it. Okay, so whenever you, Mohit Sharma, we are going to talk about that as well as we move ahead in today's class. Okay, just now sit tight and look at what I am currently explaining. Okay, so we say that, so let me just continue for now. Yes, so we say that now whenever you are going to create a particular program, I'm saying that let us suppose that you have created a C or C++ program on Dev C++ and you have saved it. Okay, so you say that you saved it. Let us say the name of the file you have given is ABC. Let us say for example. So with abc.c, right? You use .c extension for a C program. So whenever you are going to write down a C program and save it, you are going to store it with the .c extension. So currently, this particular program that you have just written is stored on the hard drive. Okay, hard disk or the hard drive, it is stored on the hard drive. And now when you want to run this particular program, what do you do on Dev C++? You're simply going to go at the top here, somewhere here, you have a certain button and you click that particular button. It is compile and run. So you have the compile and run button over here and you simply click it and it is going to run the program for you, and it is simply going to show you the output screen. And the output screen, if you have noticed, the file that the output screen opens up is the .exe file. So you have abc.exe file whenever you open up, whenever you click on the compile and run button, this dialog box opens up. It is going to show you the output of this particular file, which is abc.exe, right? So let us just move ahead and understand, break down this process. What actually happens when you press that run, compile and run button after you have written down the .c file and you have saved it, and when you run it using the button, what all happens in the background. So let us talk about that. Okay, so this thing which we are going to now be discussing is also known as the compilation process. Okay, so we are now going to talk about the compilation process. So as I said, let's suppose that you have made this program which is named as abc.c and it is stored in this file named as abc.c. And now the answer to your question, Narendra, is when we create this particular program, it is stored on the hard drive. When you uh, click on save as, give it a name and save it, it is stored on the hard drive. Okay. Now, once it is stored and now you click on the compile and run button, what happens? So the first thing that happens is that this particular file is sent to the preprocessor. So the first step that we have here in the compilation process is pre-processing. Okay. So what basically happens in pre-processing, you might already know it, but let us just review it. And for others who don't know it, you can just focus here. So we do the pre-processing part. The first thing that happens to your file is pre-processing. Now, what is pre-processing? So say for example, you have written down a simple code. Let me just write down a simple code for you. So you say in a C program, let us say you say hash include stdio dot h, and you have the main function, and inside the main function, let us say you have int a, which is 10, for example, and then you have, let us say, uh, you simply print a, let us say. So you say, I want to print the value of a. So you simply use some format specifier for an integer, and you say that I am going to print the value of a. And since you have this main function has a return type of integer, you simply return an integer and end the program. Okay, now say for example, you have this code inside this file abc.c, and now you have clicked on the compile and run button. So the first thing that happens is pre-processing. In pre-processing, as the name suggests, you are going to process the hash directives. So you say, let me just write that down for you in some, let us say, some other color. So we say that it processes the hash directives. So the work of the preprocessor is only to pick up the things which are written with the hash directive. So here in this particular program, you have only one statement with the hash directive, which is this hash include stdio.h. As you already know, this means that you want to include the contents of the file or the header file stdio.h, right? So the pre-processing, simply it is going to search for the code which is inside this header file stdio.h, and it is going to copy it at this particular position. Okay, so after pre-processing, after you pre-process this particular file, you say that the code that I get is the same code that I already have. The only changes here is that instead of this hash include stdio.h, this particular statement is going to be replaced by whatever is inside this header file stdio.h. So it is simply going to open up this file stdio.h, which is the header file, and it is going to copy its contents over here and replace this line. Similarly, if say suppose there was any other header file over here, which is let us say string.h, it is going to copy the contents of string.h and paste it over here. So this is simply pre-processing, wherein you are going to process the hash directives. Not only this, you might have known about macros, right? You know about macros. So let us say if you have hash define max as 10, and if you use max anywhere in your code, it is going to be just replaced by 10. So all of this part is done during the pre-processing stage. Okay, so you might have already looked at this a lot of times earlier. This was just a review. Now, which can any one of you tell me and respond in the group, what will be the output file, the extension of the output file after pre-processing? Yes. So it is. So some of you are replying with .i extension, some of you are replying with .o extension, others with .exe extension. So the correct answer here is that it is going to return to you a file which is going to have the .i extension, right? So the .i extension is returned whenever you pre-process the code that you have. So after pre-processing, the extension of the file that you get is abc.i. Now, after pre-processing, the next step that you have here is compilation. So now the actual compilation happens. So yes, it is going to be an intermediate process. You are not going to see this particular file. Why? Because you directly click on the compile and run button. So it is going to do all of these steps until the execution of the program without showing you the intermediate files. But you are anyway going to have these files. So whenever you have certain commands which you can use in order to see these outputs as well. We're not going to talk about those right now, but just going to understand what actually happens. Okay, so yes, so after you get the abc.i extension, the file with this extension, you go to the compilation process. Now, what is this compilation process? So as you already know, the compilation process will convert this particular code, which is currently in high level programming language. It is going to convert this for you in assembly language. So you say that the compiler converts high level language code to assembly language. And along with that, it is going to, for you, do the syntax analysis. So it is going to check if there are any syntax errors, and if there are, it is going to return you those errors, right? So it does syntax analysis as well. Okay. So this is what you're going to get after you have the compilation process which is done. So what happens in the compilation process? In the compilation process, let us say if you have, let us say for example, you write down in your code that I want to have A is equal to B into C. And let us say the other thing that you do here is B is equal to C. Now, this is currently, this particular code is in the high level programming language, which actually is a C code, but it is not understandable by the system or the computer. And what do you do here is, once you convert it to assembly language, so you might have looked into assembly language, how does this appear? So after converting this, you make it look like, let us say you have B, multiply B comma C and store it in A. And if you want to move C to B, you have this assembly language code which looks like this. So you do C, B like this. Okay, so this is just an example. This thing that I'm showing you here is just an example. Okay, so what happens when you have this file abc.i and it is given as an input to the compiler, the compiler actually converts this particular language to assembly language, which is here. So this will look like this. This is an assembly language. All of this code is converted to assembly language, and also the syntax analysis is done. So say for example, if you haven't written a semicolon here, it is going to give you a syntax error, right? So This is something that happens. Now, after the complete code is converted to assembly language, the next thing that happens is you get an output from the compiler. And what is the extension of this particular file? So the extension of this file that you get as an output from the compiler is .s, which is for assembly language. So you say the assembly language code is stored in abc.s file. Now the next step that happens here is assembly, which is performed by the assembler. So you have assembler in the next step of the compilation process. Okay. Now what is the assembler going to do for you? What is the assembler going to do for you? So the assembler is actually going to convert your assembly language code, which was in this format, to object code. So you call it as object code. So we say that it is going to convert assembly code to object code. Yes, yes, correct, Shlok. So we say that it is going to convert the assembly code to object code or to machine code. And so corresponding, so you might have, I don't know if you know it, but corresponding all of these statements that you see here. So this is assembly language. This assembly language corresponding every instruction that you have. So this is an instruction. This is also an instruction. So corresponding every instruction, you have a opcode, something known as a opcode. So opcode is in the form of zeros and ones, that is in the binary format. So corresponding every instruction, you are going to have an opcode. So let us say if this particular set of instruction is represented as, let us say, this. So this assembly language is now going to be converted to object code or to machine code, which is going to be in the format of zeros and ones. Okay, and now this particular format is understandable. So you finally have your object code. Now for object code, the file that you have, the extension of the file that you have is going to be abc.o, O for the object code, right? So you have the output of the assembler as abc.o. Now, the next step that happens here, after you have compiled, you have pre-processed, you have compiled and assembled the code, and you get the object code in abc.o file, the next thing that happens here is that you simply have the next step of the linker. Now, what is the main purpose of a linker? Can any one of you tell me what is the purpose of the linker? Yes, so correct. To link all the object files. So not only this, so say for example, you have written down a big code, or you have a certain project which has, let us say, multiple files and multiple files with multiple codes. So in order to link all of those files which are connected to a single process or program that you're going to run, it is going to link all of those files together, and it is also going to include any kind of header files or libraries that have been remaining. And after it does that, it is going to link together all of these and give a file as an output. What will be the extension of the output file once you get it from the linker? So we say it is going to combine object files into an executable file. Yes, correct. So the extension of the file that you get as an output from the linker is going to be abc.exe, right? So now you have just gotten the exe file, which is actually the executable file, and it can directly be executed. Uh, so after you've gotten this file, executable file, the last thing that happens here is the last step is of loading it. So up till now, as you already know, we started with abc.c. Again, the complete answer to the question about where this program is stored and how is it run. So we say this is stored at the hard drive, and now after you pre-process it, compile it, do the assembly part, and link all of these files together. Now, since was already, it was not in the main memory currently, this file. So after you get the executable file, you have something known as the loader, which is going to load this exe file into the main memory, and then it is going to run your C program, right? Yes. So you have this loader here. It is going to load this file abc.exe into the main memory, and then it is going to run your process. So now once this exe comes to the main memory, it becomes a process. It does not remain a program, it becomes a process and it is run. Okay. So this is the complete compilation process. Now, whenever you run any particular C program on an IDE, which is integrated development environment like Dev C++, it is going to have to do all of these steps, which is pre-processing, then compiling, assembling, linking, and finally loading, and then running the process for you. Okay, so all of these steps are compiled there in an IDE, and then you get the final output in an executable file which is running. Okay, so since we have completed with this compilation process part, if there are any doubts that you have regarding this, now you can start posting in the group any questions that you have regarding the compilation process or any steps here. Okay, Shashwat is asking, can't we directly convert high-level language code to object file? Why do we need conversion two times? Okay, so the process that is currently followed here is that whenever you have this high-level language code, it is first converted to assembly code, because only corresponding the assembly code you have this object code. This object code is not corresponding the code that you write. This code here is understandable to us. Okay, so that is why you will have to have a intermediate representation, which is the assembly language, and then finally the object code. Okay, so you're asking whenever we run any program on the online platform, we have the तब भी इतने processes होते हैं, or is it different? So the same thing happens there as well. Pre-processing compiler, you have an online compiler, so the compiler in itself has all of these things, which is going to perform all of these steps for you there. Only you will not really require a loader, because you do not need to load it to the main memory there. You just have to show the program, so it is actually running on a virtual thing. Okay, so you are saying that you don't understand what is actually happening in the linker part. Yes. So you are saying that, is it not is this thing not actually happened in the pre-processing part? So the pre-processing, what it actually does is it is going to find all the header files, copy it there, and pre-process the macros. But the linking part, if you understand, so if you have created certain projects, have you created any particular project which had separate files? So in an actual project, which I am currently considering that you didn't get a chance to actually make one, something like that. In an actual project, you have multiple files, right? So all of these multiple files can be accessed in a single project, and to access that you will require a linker. So let us say, suppose you have a particular program for let us say, if you say, for example, for hospital management system. Now say, for example, at the user end, the front end is working differently, whereas the backend is working differently. So in backend as well, you will have multiple files which will be connected to each other using the linker. Okay, so the linker is going to get all of those files which are required. So say in a program, you are going to access some certain values which are going to be given to you as an input from some other file or some other code which is in a separate file. So it is going to link all of those files together and then give you an executable file in a single go. We run the code without using the main function, no, you will always require the driver function, which is the main function, in order to run the code. Okay, so is this process same for every operating system? Now what happens, the process that we have currently talked about, let us say if you want to see each and every file, the output, we've talked about the different extensions. Here, this can be done in Linux. If you can, you'll just require the command for that. So it is gcc and then whatever file format that you're looking for. Okay, so this is something that we're talking about in Linux. In Windows, you will have something different. Which processing steps should be altered to run .exe file in different OS? Okay, so if you have run a C program in a Linux operating system, the command, if you remember, is /.a.out, right? So this is how you get a out, how you're going to run the program which has just been compiled. So of, let us say, any software you are going to use, as I said, in, let us say, in Dev C++, you simply have a button. Okay, Pavan Kumar is asking, the file present in the process, is it hexadecimal or binary? So I did not really understand your question. Is it that you're asking about the object code, or you're asking about at which position it is stored? Can you please clarify your question? Okay, so the object code is in binary. Okay, okay, so let us move ahead, since we have certain more things that we are going to be discussing today. Uh, you might have already looked into the of times, we still have reviewed that thing. And yes, so let us just continue. So now we are going to talk about how a process looks like in the memory. So a lot of you had already messaged previously that you want to look into this thing. We already are going to cover this particular topic today. So let us say, for example, you have a certain C program. So let me just write down a small C program for you. And then we are going to see how this particular C program is stored in the memory and how this particular process looks like in the memory. Okay. So say I have this variable, let us say x is equal to 10, and it is a global variable now, because since it is defined outside main. So you have a constant which has a value of 20, and then you have certain integers, let us say y, and an integer pointer as well. And now let us say, using dynamic memory allocation, I am going to allocate some memory to z. So I have allocated some memory to z, and let us say I am also initializing this integer variable y with the value 15, and let us say I am making a function call here, and yes, so, and the rest of the code. And let us say I have, so this function call, let me also write the definition of this function. So it is having a return type of void, let us say, and you simply have certain different variables, let us say mn here, and you have p, and so no, so p has already been used. Let us say this particular pointer, I am going to assign some certain uh, memory using dynamic memory allocation. So I say malloc size of int, let us say again, and yes, so this is the small code that I have. I have some global variables, some local variables, pointers, memory for dynamically allocated variables, and I am also doing a function call over here. Okay. Okay, so just give me a moment. Okay, so a lot of you are actually still posting some questions here, but your questions are something that we are going to look at a different point of time. So it is not really something that we are going to go ahead and discuss in the first lecture itself. Let us just move ahead slowly and start. Since we have started with the basics, we are going to look into these and consider your questions later on. Do not ask questions which are actually not related to the current thing that we are discussing. Okay. For now, let us just focus on what I am going to explain you further, and slowly we are going to move ahead and move in the direction from wherein you are asking questions as well. Okay, so please focus here, everyone. So I have this again. I'm going to start with this. So we have this C program here. We have certain different variables, and these variables are of different types. Let us say we have global variables, local variables, we have certain pointers, and we have some memory for dynamically allocated variables as well. And we have a function call here. Okay. Uh, Tanya, Anand, Anubhav, Mishra, Ishwar Singh. Looks like you aren't interested much in the class, so I will request you to just leave it right away. Do not discuss all of these things in the group currently because there are others who are actually uh, attending the lecture. Instead of posting your stuff here, you can just do this personally on another group if you want. Okay. Let us continue. So I was saying that let us just look at how this particular program, you have this particular uh, C program that we've written here, and how does this look like in the memory? So we have, for every C program that we create, we have something known as the process image. Let us consider how this process image looks like. Okay, so we have the first thing that we have here is stack. Then we have shared library. We call it as shared library. The next thing we have is heap. The next thing we have is read write memory. And then we have read only memory. Okay, so we have these certain different sections. For every program that we create, we have these sections. Okay, so let us look at which section stores which particular part of the code that we have just created. So you have this. Okay. So let us just first begin with stack. So what does the stack store? Can anyone tell me what does the stack in the process image store? Function calls, okay. Variables, what kind of variables? Local variables, yes, correct. Variables created by the program, but we said that we have different kinds of variables. Okay, so let us just continue and look at what is the stack going to store. So we say all of the local variables and any kind of pointers are stored inside the stack. Okay, so we say local variables and pointers are going to be stored on the stack. So which of these variables, can you tell me which of these variables here will be stored on the stack? So where all do we have local variables? We have local variables here. So y and z are local variables. Y is a local integer variable. This is a pointer, integer pointer. And this is again local variables inside the function, which is m and n. So we say that y, z, m, and n are going to be inside the stack, right? Because these are local variables, right? Okay, so some of you are writing p. P is a constant. P is not going to be stored inside the stack. Let us look at where we will continue and we will see where P will be stored. Now you have the shared library. So what is the actual purpose of a shared library? In a shared library, you actually have input output routines. So in this particular code, we do not have any input output function, but actually whenever we use any input output function, let us say printf or even scanf. So the code that works behind printf or scanf is actually stored inside the shared library. The shared library is going to have the actual code for input output routines. Okay, and certain other routines are actually stored inside the shared library. Okay, now heap. What is the actual purpose of the heap? What will heap store? The heap is here going to store for you the memory for dynamically allocated variables. Okay, so we specifically talk about the memory for dynamically allocated variables. Okay, so you have this heap here, which is going to, for you, store the memory for dynamically allocated variables. So here it means that when you have this z and you say that you are going to dynamically allocate some memory to this variable z, you have, so how much memory is this allocating to this dynamic memory allocation, allocating to the variable z? You have 4 bytes of data. If the size of the integer is 4 bytes, then it is going to have 4 bytes of memory reserved for Z. And here for M, again, you are going to have memory for dynamically allocated value. And how much this value is going to be, again, since this says size of int, and if integer is 4 bytes, it says that 4 bytes of memory will be reserved for the variable M. So this memory that is going to be reserved for the variables Z and M, since it is dynamically allocated, it is going to be inside heap. So here you say 4 plus 4 bytes, which is 8 bytes of memory, is going to be reserved in the heap. Okay. Okay, now the next thing that we have is read-write memory. So now in the read-write memory, you have global variables. So all of the global variables are stored inside the read-write memory. So in global variables, you have this value x. So x here is a global variable and it is going to be stored inside the read-write memory. Okay. So now you can see you have this particular part for every program that you create. For each and every process, you will have a particular process image in the memory. And this thing is going to be having certain different sections, and in each section you will have some different variables from the program that you have created. So in the stack, you have local variables and the pointers. In the shared library, you will have input-output routines. And in the heap, you will have memory for dynamically allocated variables. While in the read-write memory, you will have global variables. Yes, so let us also now talk about read-only memory. What are the different things that are going to be stored in the read-only memory section? In this section, you are going to have the code along with the constants. So all the code and the constants are going to be stored in the read-only memory. As the name suggests, since this kind of memory is read-only, all of the code and the constants are going to be stored inside the read-only memory. Which variable here do you see as a constant? So we have p, which is initialized to 20 as the constant. So here in the read-only memory, you are going to have this variable p. Okay, so Naman is asking, where are static variables stored? So like static variables are actually something that are going to remember their values, right? So they are actually like global variables. If you actually note down, static variables are actually like global variables. So they are going to be stored in the read-write memory. Now you see this code and constants, since they are stored in the read-only memory. Now if whenever, let us say, you are running a particular code, and while you are running the code, you write down some certain things inside the code, or you try to change the constant, the code that you're running is actually exited, right? So this happens since you're trying to modify read-only memory at runtime. Okay, so these are the different kind of variables and where they are stored based on the process. So this complete thing, this is known as the process image, which is in memory. What about function calls? Function calls are also on the stack. So for every function, so let us say when you are running this main function here, the main function is going to be a part of the stack first. Now next, when you call a main function and its local variables, so its main function and its local variables are y, z, right? And when you store y and z, its local variables and pointers in the of the main function are stored on the stack. The next thing you do is call f. F is another function. So again on the stack, you are going to have f, a section. So inside the stack, it is going to grow like this. So first you call the main function, store its local variables and pointers. Next, when you make a call to this function f, you have this function f as the next or the topmost element of the stack. And then you have the local variables and the pointers of this function f. So you have m and n here. And now once you have completely executed this function f, it is going to be removed from the stack. Then once you've executed the main function for this particular program, it is going to be again removed from the stack. So this is how stack works. Inside the stack also, you will have different sections for the functions that you have just called. Okay. Okay, Z and M are occupying space in the stack as well as in the heap. No, so we say, so there is a difference here. You say the memory for dynamically. So actually the memory that is here, so each variable will require some certain memory, right? So for dynamically allocated variables, the memory will be in the heap, while actually they will be stored on the stack. So stored on the stack means the values that are going to be accessed will be from the way I showed you the different functions and their values. Those are going to be accessed from the stack. Yes. So as Mohit said, a block of memory is created in the heap and we have these pointers which are going to point to that particular location. So the actual memory is in the heap only. Okay, any doubts in understanding this particular part? We have talked about the process image in the memory, how it looks like, what are the different sections. Before this, we talked about the compilation process, and before that, in the beginning, initially we talked about the memory hierarchy. Any doubts in understanding anything here? You can post in the group right away. Let us have a break for 5 minutes. So currently it is 12:25. We are going to again start at 12:30. Till then, if you have any doubts in any particular section, you can ask in the group, but please be restricted to only the part that we have studied. Do not go into much detail. We are going to anyway talk about details in the further classes. The stack contains local variables or the memory for the local variables. It contains the actual local variables itself. What is the input output routine? So as I said, in the shared library, so whenever you have, say for example, you have the printf and the scanf function, in this header file stdio.h. So whatever is the basic code for printf and let us say for scanf, it is going to be in the shared routine. From the shared routine, whenever you are executing a particular function from the shared routine, it is going to be accessed once the printf statement is completely executed. And then even if you have the scanf function, once it is completely executed, it is going to be there only. So you actually pick up how this thing is done, how the input and output is done from the shared library. So there can be, so it input output routine not only means printf and scanf function. So say for example, you are actually doing it for a file. So you are storing, you are reading the input from the file and you're storing the input to the file. So these kind of routines, the actual code for how it is done will be inside the shared library. Where are member functions stored? So yes, so now if we let us say talk about C++ program where you have classes and where you have all of the member functions. So those code, that particular part of the code will be inside the read-only memory. As I have mentioned that the code and the constants will be inside read-only memory. Can you just mention the in the group what we cover in today's lecture? Why do you want me to mention it in the group? We are already looking at it, right? And if you just want to understand, just want to look at the topic names, then you can look at the PDF that we have shared earlier. In the PDF, you will have all of the topic names that are going to be discussed in each class, along with the day that we are going to discuss those. Okay, so in the above diagram where we have talked about memory hierarchy, they are not all primary memory as we've discussed. In primary memory, you are only going to have RAM, cache and registers. So the main memory, the cache and the registers will be a part of the main memory. Why? Because they are directly accessible by the processor, and all the other things that we've talked about will come under the secondary memory since they are not directly accessible, like the hard drives, optical discs, and magnetic tapes. Okay. Okay. So let us just continue. We have talked about three different things today. The first one was memory hierarchy, and then we discussed about how does a process, a C program compile, what are the different steps in the compilation process. Then we looked into the process image in the memory. How does a C program or a process, once you run it, look like in the memory? Now, let us since we've already talked about how a process looks in the memory, how it is run, all of the different steps. Now let us look at how is it stored. Okay, so actually it is stored like this, but what if you want to, let us say, pick up the actual address of a program? How do you do it? So let us talk about physical and logical addresses. Let me just change the color. Okay, so let us move ahead by understanding this particular concept here, which is about physical and logical addressing. Now, this particular topic that we are currently going to discuss is a part of operating systems, which you will actually learn in detail later on whenever you're actually going to take up the operating system subject. But currently, we are going to look into it only the very basic part and how it actually happens. So, just to give us a small basic idea of what is actually happening when we consider the addresses. Okay, so now say let me just give you an example, and then you will be able to understand something very easily. So say for example, if you want to go to your neighbor's house. Okay, if any one of you wants to go to your neighbor's house, what are you going to do? You're simply going to get out of your door, and you're going to go out and walk down the street and simply enter the next house, which to whichever neighbor's house you want to go, right? Now, so this is when you want to go to your neighbor's house. Now, say for example, you have some uncle of yours who's living in, let us say, Gujarat, and now you want to visit him. So, whenever you want to visit him in Gujarat, you would want to know the actual, first of all, since you already know that he's in Gujarat, you know the state, you know the country, and you will now need to know in which city is he living, along with the actual details like let us say in a particular city which location, along with, let us say, if he is living in a flat, you will need to know which building, along with the actual house number, or even if he has a house, you will have to know the name of the street, the locality, and other things like that, right? So, there is difference in between these two things. The first thing is that whenever you know where so whenever you want to visit your neighbor, you actually know where the house is physically present. So you simply go out. You do not actually need to know the actual details, which is like which tower number and which house number, which street number you want to go to. You simply get out of the house and go to your neighbor's home. But say suppose you want to visit someone who's distant, you will require the actual details, the street number, the flat number, the building number, and stuff like that, right? So similarly, now since you know this particular example, similarly, we have two different types of addresses when we talk about storage of a particular program in the memory. So those two addresses, as written here, are physical address and logical address. Okay, so let us first talk about the logical address. So just okay. So we say that a logical address is actually the address which is generated by the CPU while the program is running. Okay, so let me write that down for you so that you can take notes as well. So you say that it is generated by the CPU when the program is running. Okay, so this is something which is actually done by the CPU. It is not done by any other part. So whenever you are running a program, it always happens that the CPU is going to generate a logical address. So the address that is generated at that time is known as the logical address. It is also known as virtual address. Why? Because it does not actually exist physically. Okay, so this is something that you need to note down very carefully, that it is, firstly, it is also known as virtual address. And why is it known as virtual address? Sorry, let me just, yes. So it is also known as virtual address. And why is it also known as virtual address? Because it does not exist physically. Okay, now why do you think we use this address, and why do you think we call it a logical address? We call it a logical address because it is generated by the CPU and it is from the program's perspective. Okay, so from the program's perspective, you will say that the CPU is going to generate an address for me, which it is going to use whenever it is running the program in order to see where this program is kept in the memory. Okay, so this is known as logical address. And let us also talk about physical address first, and then we will talk about the requirement. Okay, we will understand why is this required, why are two different addresses required. So we say that we have the physical address. Now, as the name suggests, the physical address is something which identifies the actual physical location of the required data in the memory. Required data, by required data here, I mean the actual process that you want to run. Okay. So we say it identifies the physical location of the process. Okay, now why do we, let us first talk about why do we require it. Okay, so we say that so whenever we want to run a particular program, we have the physical address, as well as when you run this particular program, the CPU is going to generate a logical address. And why is it done? So why it is done is because the user does not actually deal with the physical address. So whenever you are running a program, there is the actual address of the program, which is actually going to find out from the memory where it is stored. Okay, and that is the physical address. Now you do not want the user to know what is the actual physical address. But why will you not want to know that the user why will you not want the user to know what is the actual address where the program is stored? Let me answer that question. So that is because you want to restrict the user from actually going into the address part, any address of the memory. Okay, so if the user knows what is the physical address of a particular program, he would want to alter and change the position, or let us say the address, in the way that he likes. But you do not always want to do it. Why do you not want to do it? Because there are certain restricted areas in the memory, let us say, where the operating system is stored. So in the memory, you have the operating system which is stored at certain location, the kernel which is stored at certain location. Now you do not want the user in any way to just change that particular location or make any changes to the addressing. So for that purpose, we have these two different kind of addresses, the physical address and the logical address. So the physical address is the actual location, actual physical location, or the actual address which is of the memory where the process is stored, while the logical address is something which is generated by the CPU so that the user can use it. Okay, so the user is going to simply refer to the logical address and indirectly access the physical address. Okay, so is this thing clear to you? Now, how are you going to map these two things? So for this, you have a hardware device. This hardware device is known as the MMU or memory management unit, which is for you. So we say logical address is mapped to physical address by a hardware device which is MMU, which stands for memory management unit. Okay. Yes, correct. So this is for security purpose, that the user will not actually know what is the physical address of a particular process. Instead, he can use the logical address in order to indirectly access the physical address of a particular process. Okay, so this is the same. This in using this, you can understand what are the different ways in which the process is stored, where it is stored, and which is the address that is accessible to the user and which one is only accessible to the system. Okay, so only for now, for this particular class, since we have just introduced the concept of physical and logical addresses, you do not need to go in much detail until and unless you actually are studying the operating system perspective here. This was just to give you a basic idea of how this thing happens, and I have already told you why we do it. We do it because we want to restrict some certain areas of the memory from the user. So for that purpose, we are going to give the logical address to the user and not the physical address. Okay, so this, and now whenever you want to say, whenever the user wants to access the memory of a particular program or a process, he can access it using the logical address. So the user gives the logical address. Once he gives the logical address, the MMU is going to convert this particular logical address to the physical address, and then the physical address is accessed. Another perspective, if you want to think about in this way, is that you say that the user program will actually generate a logical address because it thinks that the program is running at this particular address. For the user, the program is running at the logical address, but the actual program will require some memory, some physical memory is required by the actual program to run, right? And the physical memory that is required, whatever it is stored, is something that we have seen here, right? So the actual physical memory is required by any particular program to run, and for that you have the physical address. So since you have the physical address for execution, it is not actually shown to the user, only the logical address is given to the user. Okay. Any doubts in understanding the physical and logical addressing part? We have just looked into the basic. The only details that you require to know have been told to you. No much detail we are going to go into. We are just going to understand how this thing is done and why this thing is done. Okay? If you still have any doubts, then you can post it in the group. Okay, so you're saying that the logical address acquire memory even for a short period of time. So why will address uh, acquire some memory? Address actually does not require any memory. Address means something that is pointed to by, right? So here, when we say about logical address and physical address, logical address is just an alias. Okay, so I gave you that particular example when I said that whenever you want to go to your neighbor's home, you are simply going to go out and walk on the street and enter the next door. This means that you simply know where it is. Similarly, the CPU similarly simply knows where the program is, but for the user's purpose, it is going to give it the logical address. The physical address is the actual address of a memory location. Logical address is actually just like an alias, which you can be which you can use in order to access the physical address. Now, इससे क्या होता है? The thing here happens is that only the physical address which is corresponding to the logical address that can be accessed by the user will be provided to the user, and not any physical address which should not be given to the user. So there will be some certain physical address, let us say, where, for example, the kernel or the operating system is stored. That will also have a physical address, but that will not be the logical address corresponding that will not be provided to the user. Only the logical address which will be corresponding a physical address that can be provided to the user will be given. Okay, so we are not going to here consider how the MMU works. We are only going to understand what is the purpose of MMU. You can read about these details online if you're interested. Otherwise, you are going to study it in the operating system subject whenever you're going to have it. We are simply just here going to understand that the physical address, any logical address that the user uses will be mapped to the physical address, and that will be done by the MMU, which is the memory management unit. The process of actually mapping it is a very huge, let us say, and complex process to understand, which will, let us say, require another lecture for us. But for now, just to understand that logical address can be mapped to physical address, which is done using this particular device. The address itself is a value of something, then it must occupy some space in the memory somewhere. Yes, that is what we are talking about, Pushkar. The physical address actually has some memory. It is actual memory location, but that is only a physical address that we are talking about is something which is first converted. So whenever you are going to access any logical address, that will be corresponding a physical address. So first you convert the logical address to physical address and then access it. Okay, so I hope that clarifies all of your doubts. Narendra JT, I have just answered this question. Please listen to whatever I am speaking very carefully. We have just talked about what this thing does. Logical address is simply like an alias which is going to refer to and will be converted to physical address in order to access. Okay, anyway, let us just quickly see what all things we've covered. Once again, memory hierarchy, compilation process, process image in the memory, along with physical and logical addressing. We have just understood how this thing is done. Okay, so logical address does not have an actual memory, correct? It is not actually a memory location. It is first converted to physical address and then you will get the actual memory address that you can access. Okay, so we are done with the topics that we had to discuss today, and let us just quickly have a feedback session regarding the speed that I'm going with. Is this speed that we have just talked about today okay for you? Or do you want me to go a bit faster or a bit slower, or is it fine? If any of these things you think there is, please post it in the Telegram group. Again, I would like to repeat that the things that we are going to be discussing will be basics, and we are not going to go much in detail. For any particular thing that we are going to be going in detail will be mostly coding stuff, and all of the discussions will be depending upon the time that we have, because since there is also a time constraint, we are also going to consider that. Okay, so a lot of you are saying that the speed is fine. That's great. Let us move ahead in the next classes or the next lectures in the same speed. And if at any point of time you're going to have any doubts, this is the Telegram group that you're going to refer to. In the same Telegram group, you are going to get the link for the next day's class as well. Okay, and any queries regarding the winter boot camp should be posted in the GEU third semester CSIT group or GEHU, depending upon your own university. Okay, so since it has come out to be fine, let us meet tomorrow, the same time, which will be 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I'm going to be posting the link for the next class by today itself. And we are going to continue and look at some different topics tomorrow. If you want to consider the different topics, you can look at the PDF that has been shared to you. And yes, that will be all for today. Thank you, everyone.